What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode. So yesterday in my group coaching training call with my BTA students, we got on the topic of money and how to manage it, like from a financial perspective. And this is an interesting topic, I think, because there's two levels, I think, that people go through, two journeys that we all go through on our financial quest. First, you start with no money. And when you have no money, you feel like an idiot talking about money. You don't want to talk about it with your friends or family. And so most of us, what we do when we don't have money, we don't want to look like an idiot, is that we just keep doing what we're doing and we keep our mouths shut. And we don't talk to anybody about it. And so we don't learn the strategies, we don't learn the tactics that would maybe give us a chance of actually going and making the money that then, would solve that problem. For me, on my journey, a big part of actually starting to win the money game was to stop treating money as this shame-filled thing. And instead of pretending like it didn't matter, I acknowledge it does matter, and I can't get better at this if I don't, move towards improving this skill with intention. That included talking to people. So that's part one of your journey. You gotta figure out how to get out of your own way when you don't have the money to go talk about it, so you can figure out what strategies will get you there. But there's a second phase, which is once you've made money, it can also be really awkward now to talk about money, because now it's a slightly different thing. Now you don't want to come off as braggadocious. You don't want other people judging you. Like if your friends and family don't have money, maybe you feel like there's nobody that you can talk to that can help you understand what you should do with it next. And so the people that I was talking with in yesterday's training call are really more in that second category. People who've made a bit of money and now they're like, okay, how do I manage this effectively? What do I do? And it was a really great conversation. And I want to share with you just 3 of the takeaways that we covered in that conversation. I think these can serve you regardless of where you are on the journey. Maybe you're really early and you haven't made money yet, and you're trying to figure out how to win this money game. Well, just put a pin in this, save these notes for later. They will serve you, I promise. And if you've already started to make a bit of money and you're like, okay, I'm trying to figure out how to play this game better. What do I do with this now? Stay tuned. So the first idea that I want you to understand is this idea of like, where am I over leveraged in terms of my investment portfolio? You hear about diversification all the time, right? Like diversification is protection. But the problem is that what makes you rich in the first place is probably not diversification, right? It's specification, getting really, really dialed in on your business or a particular skill set. Like it's probably the thing that makes you money is probably a function of a singular basket that you put all your eggs into. Then it gets really big. And then you start worrying about diversification, right? That makes a lot of sense. Like once you have a lot to protect, maybe we should diversify it so we can't lose it all in one place. And so the student that I was talking to yesterday, she's like, we've done well, but it feels like I might be over-indexed into real estate. Should I be considering stocks and bonds and crypto? What should I be thinking about gold and precious metals and things like that? And so the first activity that we go through is to map out, if you were to create a pie chart of all of your domain experience and expertise and skills and resources as it pertains, let's say, to your business, to real estate, to stocks, to the bond market, to precious metals, map all of that out in terms of how much you know about each one of those domains. Like if you're a business owner, then that's going to probably be like maybe 50% of the pie right there, right? If you know a lot about real estate, maybe that's 25%. Maybe if you know a little bit about the stock market and bonds, you kind of understand it and you kind of follow it a little bit, maybe that's 15, 20%, right? And if you don't know much about crypto, maybe that's like 2 to 5%. So we map out your percentages of knowledge as it pertains to each one of those domains. And then what I want you to do is create another pie chart. And this one actually maps out what your investment portfolio looks like. So in the instance of the woman that I was working with yesterday, she maps out her knowledge. She has a lot of business expertise. She has a lot of real estate expertise because they've been doing it for a long time, and a bit about all the other things, right? So it kind of broke out to like 40% business, 40% real estate, 20% for everything else. Then when you map out the actual investment portfolio, what we found was when we asked the question, where does the majority of your net worth and your income actually come from? Well, it mapped out to about 40% from the business, about 40% from real estate, and then 20% roughly from all the other things. And so when you put those two pie charts next to each other, what you realize is that you're actually perfectly invested in relation to your knowledge and your expertise And that's important because when it comes to investing, you look for things that give you a unique edge. What is your competitive advantage in that place? And diversifying into things that you know nothing about actually doesn't improve or increase your safety. It might increase your perceived safety, but if you invest in the things that are proportional to your knowledge base, then you can find better opportunities, or you can recognize bad deals, or if they do go south, then you can do things about it because you understand that underlying asset that much better. So the way I want you to think about this is that you invest proportional to your expertise. You don't just diversify into things that you don't know anything about. Like, it could be very easy to say, oh, maybe I should go diversify into ATMs or into Airbnbs. And it's like, but what do you know about that? If you know nothing about that, then yeah, you're diversified, but like, it's just stupidity, right? I think Warren Buffett said, diversification is the tax that we pay for ignorance or something like that. I can't remember exactly. So, second idea that I want you to think about is, this was a really interesting one. What kind of set off this conversation initially with the student was they own a bunch of real estate, and they're thinking about buying a villa out in a beautiful foreign country. And there's two ways that they can buy this villa. They can either use the cash they have already in the bank and saved up, because they like to buy things outright, no partners, and they like to own them with as little debt as possible. Okay, so they could use all of their savings, their reserves, to buy this villa. The problem with this for them is that by doing so, it would reduce their reserves and their liquidity to a level that they're not necessarily comfortable with. They haven't had that little money in the bank in a long time, right? And so, yes, they could buy it with the cash, but it leaves them at a level where it feels a little bit uncomfortable to know that they don't really have a backup plan, right? Well, the other way that they could buy the villa is that they could get lines of credit, they could take out debt. They have all these other leveraged vehicles available to them. So the question is, which one do you use? Do you use the cash? Do you use the debt? Do you use the leverage? Now, my general rule is that you invest from the thing that is inherently less valuable to you. Right. And the way that you measure which one is more valuable to you, especially as you get to the point where you have money, is which one causes you the least amount of mental anguish. Because you spent a lot of your time and your energy going and accumulating money, right? Like you had to exchange your time, you had to exchange your mental peace of mind and quality of life to get money. Now that you have the money, the point of the money was so that you could buy back your life in a way that doesn't require you to keep putting your time and your energy and your mental bandwidth into things, right? But if we take that money that we sacrificed our mental well-being for, and then we go and invest it into things that also cost us our mental well-being, then what was the point of having the money in the first place? Like, it's kind of like, it doesn't quite make sense, right? All you have along the way is all this mental anguish. So the way I look at this is, ask yourself, what's your money thermostat? What's the number that you don't feel comfortable going below, right? So that could be maybe 100,000, maybe it's 200,000. What's that number in the bank that you feel comfortable knowing, as long as I have this number, I feel okay, right? And then don't go below that. Not because it's the best financial decision, because like we can map this out. We can make what is quantitatively the best financial decision. We can model that. We can know, okay, well, if we take the cash and we invest that into bonds and we use the debt over here, we can offset the leverage there, right? Like, you could do the arbitrage numbers on this. But at a certain point, the most important variable, the metric that you're measuring, is peace of mind, right? And that can't be measured quantitatively. So you have to use the subjective, like, okay, am I comfortable with this? And in their case, they weren't really comfortable spending down the cash and then having the lower bandwidth or reserves sitting there. Were they going to use it? Were they going to need it? No, but some people just like to know that the money is there, right? So it's kind of knowing what your psychology is. So what we recommended here is like, okay, it's probably better to use the debt and the leverage so that you can keep your liquidity over here. Knowing, here's the really important idea, guys. Here's a really, if you're just like zoned out for a second, pay attention right here. This is really important. The reason I would make this recommendation to this student to use the debt and the leverage to acquire the asset and not the cash is because they have the cash necessary to pay off the leverage should they find themselves in a pinch. So let's use an example. If they have $100,000 of cash that they could use to buy this building, they decide instead to use leverage. They use the the line of credit, the HELOC, whatever, right? For 100,000. And so they kept their 100,000 in the bank. The reason I'm okay with these students in particular doing this, of using the leverage, is because 6 months, 9 months down the road, if they decide to, they could always use this cash to pay off the debt. Now, it's a different conversation if they're taking on more debt than they have the ability to pay off. And that's how most people buy real estate, to be honest, right? Like, that's one of the things that got me into trouble with our $100 million real estate portfolio, is I personally guaranteed $40 million of debt, right? So you need to be really careful about how much debt that you take on relative to your abilities. For them, understanding their psychology and recognizing they're risk averse, they don't like the idea of having debt, but they also don't like the idea of not having reserves. Okay, what is the best of all worlds? Well, the best of all worlds is get the debt, keep the cash reserves, don't use it on anything else. Don't resist your urge to go buy some other shiny object in the meantime because you have cash sitting there. Keep it sitting there. And that way, if this debt ever starts causing you mental angst, you can use this to pay it off. Right? So you're no risk. It's pretty much the same situation than if you had just led with paying it off with cash, except for now you're buying yourself more time to accrue more liquidity, more cash in the bank, so that eventually, maybe 7-9 months down the road, they have another equity, like some kind of cash event where now they have more money in the bank. They can afford to pay off this debt. And by doing so, they still stay above their minimum threshold, like whatever that number was. That's a perfect world. So we're just buying ourselves time and not putting ourselves into a situation where we're going to be over leveraged at any given point. The other idea here is around when is the right time and the right ways to use debt and leverage. So the other idea here is that they're paying, I think it was like maybe we'll say $4,000 a year to have this $150,000 or $200,000 line of credit open, right? They haven't used it in a couple of years, and they're like, should we keep this open? Should we keep doing that? I know we're just kind of like wasting money. But the idea here that wealthy people think about is opportunity cost. And it's not necessarily modeling out like what is the single best arbitrage on a spreadsheet for my money. Because if that's the case, then yeah, you probably shouldn't just be spending money for the right to draw it down later. But if you think about this as an insurance policy, you're spending $4,000 a year for the insurance policy of having access to $150,000 to $200,000 should something go wrong later. Hopefully you don't need to use it. You could use it on any number of things. I mean, you're already paying for it in the form of the interest, right? So you could be using it to go and acquire things. But if you don't want to use debt, you just want to have access to it should something go wrong. There's nothing wrong with that, right? And so I really encourage people, when you get to the level where you've maybe not like outright won the money game, but you're doing well enough now where it's like it's unlikely you're gonna lose the money game. Just stop thinking about things in terms of like what's the maximum optimal return that I can get, and instead start optimizing for the more intangible return on life, like return on peace of mind, and start using those metrics to make your financial decisions. So that is how, in my experience, the wealthy tend to think about their money much more so than people that don't have money. So hopefully this gives you some things to think about, some things to chew on. Let me know down in the comments if you guys got any value out of this. Otherwise, I'll see you guys in the next video.